Island Real Estate Advisory Committee. We have a quorum: Howard Pollovy, Chair, Faye Christian. Joining us is Sal Ferrer, Board Member, and Margie Smith, Board Member by phone. Our agenda first is to discuss the placement, use, permitting of mobile food carts on the island. There's been some concern whether we have a process in place, what it is, where these food vendors might be situated, what their hours might be, all sorts of concerns with setting up this community amenity. Anyone bring anything to bear to this?
You want to just brought up?
Well, let me just begin that we have two permits out there. This is Fernando speaking, Margie.
Okay.
Yeah, we have two permits out there for vending out on the public spaces on Roosevelt Island. One is for the fruit stand that's been out there for a couple of years now, and then one that was recently done, I think this past summer or spring for Mr. Softy. And in each case we have, it's a RIOC permit, we have the required insurances from each of those vendors, but more importantly we also have a copy of their license from the respective city agency, which I believe is the Department of Consumer Affairs, or allowing them to vend in New York City. But what has happened is that we've received a number of requests for vending on Roosevelt Island. Newspaper stand, hot dog stand, falafel cart, and so on. And we kind of put it on hold because this is prior to the retail master lease being issued to the Hudson companies. But in all essence, we didn't have an overall policy in terms of food vending on the island. So now with these requests, I think it was timely to bring it to the real estate committee to come up with a policy and direction for the corporation on how we're going to handle food vending. So I put it before the committee to see what, and we don't have to make a decision now, but we can start the discussion in terms of what we should do or some of the things we need to think about.
Oh, well, let's talk about a little background. First off, would food vendors here need to adhere to New York City Code?
Yes, and everything that we do here within Roosevelt Island, we follow New York City Code. Whether we're constructing a building or doing a capital project, we follow New York City Code. That's standard to everything that we do here.
Okay. So we would have an additional layer of concern and control. You mentioned that we have our island-specific permitting process.
Right. Right, so we charge a nominal fee for a RIOC permit. We have a copy of the insurance, and I think they're also in the permit, there are basic rules and regulations. And then we also have a copy of their respective license, because we don't want someone coming here that's selling food and they're not inspected by any, we don't have those resources at RIOC. Mm-hmm. So we have to rely on New York City because they have that. Either Department of Health or Consumer Affairs, to make sure that this business or the food that's being sold from that vendor is not in violation anyway. Because if something were to happen, then we're responsible. Especially if we have someone that doesn't have the proper inspections done and licenses.
Does our authority to have additional licensing requirements derive from being the state authority? You know, here's a food cart, and it could be parked over the bridge legally and do business over the bridge legally. What's the basis for our authority in imposing additional restraints?
Well, It's not so much restraints, it's more so to making sure that the person is approved to operate
Yeah, I'd
and
have
to
to look
sell.
at it, however, I think it's in the enabling legislation, I think it's in the RIOC Act.
I'm
pretty sure that's where it is.
Okay.
I'd have to look, I have to go back and
Yeah,
look, but I'm pretty sure.
I'm pretty sure it exists also, but.
Right, no, I'm pretty sure that authority you're asking derives from the RIOC Act, which is the enabling legislation for RIOC.
Okay, but, you know, as a funny beast, as a state authority, we exercise a different level of control
Mhm.
than a neighborhood authority would elsewhere in the 5 boroughs.
Mhm.
So there's that. And we have our own particular concerns because we have limited roadway, we have access requirements, we have some consideration from vendors. So in an article I read recently, and I can't remember the judge's name right now, there was a ruling back in May in the city that there's some reason why the city can insist that food carts move, that they are restricted from operating in many of the legal parking spots in the city. And so informally, they've been allowed because people have been neighborly in many different ways. But if there are substantial complaints in the neighborhood, then they could certainly be forced to move.
Mhm.
So we need to be cognizant that there may be complaints after we're done figuring out some rules. And if there are complaints, then unless we extend special permissions,
Mhm.
the carts, of course, would need to
Can I ask
move.
you a question? I'm not familiar with any of the, I know you have to be licensed, that's where my knowledge is. But when I walk through Battery Park City, where my brother lives, the vendors there, all of the carts are nice, you know, certain colors and certain sizes, and there's not many of them, so I don't know what the issues are there, but the carts that are there enhance the area. My concern with having vendors is, you know, you can have, you know, a truck, you could have something that smells, something that's not clean, something that doesn't enhance the area that's around it. Do we have any control of that in terms of what?
Right now, we don't, because we don't have a policy, and again, that would be part of what should be born out
Well,
of the committee.
Would be wise to, you know, just take a walk through Battery Park? And
Oh, absolutely.
Just
Just-
hold them up. and find out.
Excuse me?
I think that's their policy.
You can what Steve said is what I was gonna say.
Yeah.
I mean, you could go take a look ourselves.
Take
and see
a
what
look,
we're
I
at.
think it's
But the other
a key
thing,
thing.
the other point that Steve made, it's a very good point, is that they're kind of similarly situated somewhat, Battery Park,
Yes,
Roosevelt Island. So they
exactly.
already have these vendors who we like, or that you like.
Exactly, I'm
You
just
can
talking
contact
about,
their
yeah,
person and about their policy.
yeah,
We give contacts there, I said,
Yeah.
well, we do, somebody.
yeah, I think that would
We
be a
can get
good
their,
idea.
that might be a good starting
'Cause
point for coming up with our
I
own
compare
policy.
that to Soho, you go into Soho and the sidewalks are crowded with vendor after vendor after vendor, it's not comfortable, you know? And they're selling jewelry and, it's interesting, the jewelry, everybody's crowded together. The vendors for food have their own customized trucks and they park there. But walking through Soho with those vendors is not, you know, it doesn't really add to any. Walking through Battery Park, it's a whole different story there, it's
Right.
nice and comfortable, so, yeah.
The criteria needs to be established. If this is the direction that the committee would want to go through, then we need to establish a criteria in terms of what type of vendor, what location, what type of cart, and so on and so on. So the process needs to be put in place in order to do something like this.
Now, location. You know, or we have limited access through our roadways.
Right.
And there are some natural locations that people might wish to see a vendor. I would think near the tram, I would think near the subway, and I would think not near the tram and not near the subway, where you're also not near some of the restaurants.
Right.
For example, near Manhattan Park,
Right.
or that area in the north part of the islands.
Or even South Point when it.
When South
Point.
South Point opens, that would,
Summertime.
it would be seasonal, but yeah,
Right.
that would be a great location.
Yeah, John mentioned.
Guys, this is Margie, can I jump in a second? Do we know for sure that there's nothing in the Hudson-related contract that precludes us from allowing food vendors on the island?
There is,
I'll have to go back, I think between Blackwell House and Motorgate, that's what the area is for the, and there is provisions in there that, you know, they didn't want, food vendors competing with stores that are paying them rent, and it makes sense.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's not non-competitive because everybody has an opportunity to rent a spot, I mean, a storefront.
But also,
You know,
from
so-
Motorgate to Blackwell House is the most congested part of the island.
Right, and it's gonna have all the storefronts there. So it kinda makes sense, actually, outside that area, you could
But-
kinda,
Wouldn't it also make sense to see what stores open up so that we don't have, you know, additional, conflicts? So-
but that's what Hudson Related, they're
Yeah,
experts.
yeah.
Right,
So-
They're,
yeah,
they're gonna,
okay.
yeah, I'm sure they
They're
wanna
gonna
maintain.
dictate, yeah.
right. I think whatever discussion, follows up after this should include Hudson related, because we need to get their
You get a
expertise and
sense
their
of,
advice.
you get a sense of what kind of
Right.
stores are gonna be
Exactly.
here, and what kind of stores are gonna be here.
In fact, I would like to
We
have
have
a
to do some
committee
research
meeting
on our end, yeah.
with them
Oh,
present.
Well, not even so much a committee meeting, but a working group or a little task force to
Okay.
talk about this. I
I
don't
think
think we need to have a
we
committee
have to
meeting.
do a little, like, investigation,
Right.
research, and then see, you know.
Research will be a joy, because you
Right.
can go to every nice place in Manhattan.
Right.
Go to Grand Central,
And
go to
sample.
Battery Park, yeah.
Well, I know this sounds okay. I mean, this, what do you call it,
The food court, let's call it the food court. Well, the only reservation I have about this, I mean, the concept is great
What is
and
this,
everything.
Margie, again, what is this?
This is the plan
This is
that was
the,
presented by Riverwalk Bar and
Riverwalk.
Grill, Margie?
And I actually got a copy of it from Jonathan Hull.
Right.
All right, that's what we're talking about right now, just
So-
so you know.
Pardon
So the concept of having these type of food courts in very attractive centralized areas is great. It gives it like a communal eating area and a very attractive location. And for us, this would be across from the train station.
So this is that,
Okay.
pier that's
So.
kind of underutilized.
The only,
Yeah.
if the committee would wanna do something like this, we can explore this, but again, we have to go through a process. Through to determine, if we wanna do this, and then also we can't make it, exclusive, we have to do some type of public process, because now we're basically conveying space. And the same thing even with street vendors.
How about we look, I mean, couldn't we do, if you do licensing, doesn't that mean you don't have to go through that process like we did with didn't Steve do something, not Steve Sharonis, but Shane do something with the tennis bubble where they did the same kind of deal that they did in Grand Central, that they didn't have to go through the whole process because they were licenses and not leases?
No,
I'm not-
that was a contractual, it couldn't be, that agreement had to be, there was a clause in there that had to, that agreement, if RIOC needed that land back at some point in time, that agreement would have to be cancelable, and it couldn't be done through a lease. So they did it, this is years ago, about 30 years ago, 25 years ago, through a license agreement. And we would have to pay, you know, that was the reason why it was done.
well, it could still be done again.
It was done again, though, just recently.
What do you mean recently?
When Steve Shane was here, it wasn't 30 years ago. It was done again up to like 2046 or something, right?
Yeah, because of the agreement, the way it was structured, it couldn't be done through a lease.
But if it were done,
But-
well,
but-
they've set a precedence now, so.
Well, I think we need to take a look.
This is Don, there may be a precedent, and if we think there is one, we could point to specifically what we think it was, and I'm happy to look into the specifics of what it was, rather than sitting here and speculating
Right.
about what it
Right.
is, and having
Yeah.
imprecise
Yeah.
Right.
Great.
rendition of what it was.
Well,
If you think there's something we can look into that would help with whatever policy we're doing, and you know something that happened a few years ago before I was here, and you want me to look into it, feel free to ask, and I'll look into it and get
Mhm.
concrete
Makes a lot more
answers
sense.
Yes, please.
about what's going on.
Please.
Mhm.
So,
Well, I personally like the idea of that area. I mean, the whole plan sounds nice, and it looked nice, it'll certainly be something for the tourists when they come
Right.
into the area.
Well, one thing we do have to think about too is there are residential apartments right near
Right.
that.
There are.
We don't want something where it turns into a bar scene on Saturday and Sunday nights with music and everything.
True, that's
That's
true.
true.
Right,
But we can put, there could be certain regulations,
Right.
limits. I mean, that's the whole point of setting aside, getting
exactly. I think we
together.
need to have a working group.
Right, to do that.
We need to have a working group not a committee meeting, but to have a working group that has a balance of community representation, board members, members of RIOC, and talk about some of these issues. But my whole point is, just like with this, if we go with street vendors, we have to do a public process in terms of issuing an RFP that RIOC is seeking to have X number of street vending opportunities on Roosevelt Island at these locations. So that way it's fair to everyone, and then once we meet that, let's say, number, we're done. And then we give it a finite time in terms of, we have these vending opportunities for a 3-year term, and the next time we can do something like this will be for another 3-year terms, for example. And again, maybe we can avoid all of that if there's something in the tennis bubble clause that serves as a precedent, but I'm just thinking in terms of practicality and what we're required to do, and the same thing with this food court, we have to follow the same process. We can't make it exclusively to the bar and grill, we have to make it a public process. So there may be someone else that may be interested in that, and we have to weigh those opportunities. Once we decide that we want to make this space available for this type of activity.
Yeah, I think we may be okay though because it's all temporary. There's nothing, no permanent structure in a food vendor, and there's no permanent structure in putting some tables out there. So it's not like a lease where you're giving the property for X number of years. So, I mean, we can take it back in 5 minutes. And I would like to look at a shorter lease, as short as possible, because if we do have some vendors there that we don't like, that aren't clean or whatever, and we
Right.
want to get rid of them, I'd hate to be stuck with them for 3 years.
Right, I agree. And what about the old trams? I know that John also wanted me to mention that he's interested in one of the old trams for South Point.
Again,
That's Alphonse.
Right, his partner.
His partner.
at the bar and grill. With the old tram is, again, a process. We can't convey something just straight out like that.
No, I'm just bringing it up
No,
so
no, no,
that we
but-
can keep it in mind.
So,
Is he
well,
interested in, he's interested in having
the
a physical
cabins,
tram?
the
Wants to-
old cabins.
We were-
So we have to make it available to the general public once we decide to do that, and then, and do it, there's a whole disposition
Okay,
process.
that's
So you
fine.
look into it.
Right.
He wants to open a, what do you call it, a vendor.
Yeah, so I was gonna ask, he's
Oh,
gonna
from
make
out
it
of
a
the
vendor, yeah.
Make it into a
That's
little
interesting, yeah.
Food
food
stand.
stand
Yeah.
That is
in
interesting.
South
That is
Point,
interesting, yeah.
which I thought was a pretty cute idea.
is a
Judy
good idea.
Birdie wants one too.
Okay, that's nice. So, well, let's see. We're not going to reach a conclusion
No.
at this point.
It's the beginning of a discussion.
Right, but we have two somewhat different issues. The first is a possible use of the space, the pier, which is near the subway, possibly as a food court under what might be a fairly short-term licensing arrangement, we don't know yet. But we also have the idea of the street vendors who are motorized carts, who choose to come here from time to time. So we're going to look at Battery Park City or any other similar development to understand what their policy is. We'll consider possible locations that would be available for them to park, and having a set number of locations would lead us maybe to conclude that we should have a certain number of permits available, first come, first served, and possibly more permits than spots, and whoever's here occupies a spot, and go that way. So we would need to formulate a policy that way, with the idea that all these carts are properly licensed by the city. One presumes that they're meeting all code requirements, that they're not nuisances, of course. And so we would have some quality criteria written into our licensing arrangement. And we might also have you know, a little bit of pricing, not much, from contacts from the other sources.
Right.
So, you know, the city licenses are not very expensive. You know, on the order of $100 for 2 years or thereabouts. So, we'll-
If I just may add to that, Mr. Polly, I know that,
you can call me
okay, Howard. But not Howard, right?
No.
Okay, Howard. All right, so, you know, I know we received some criticism, public safety did, we did in terms of the lobster truck and so on, but I think, until such time that we have a policy in place, we need to, continue with what we've been doing so far, and that is that we're not, issuing any more permits, and that, we're not allowing any food vendors until we have a policy in place, because just out of fairness, and also practicality, because we can't say no to one, and then the next person we say yes. It's either we say yes to everyone without a policy, and then we have no control, or which I don't recommend. I think the safe thing is that we don't do anything, and don't have anyone food vend until we have a policy in place.
Well, I know the community is quite interested in this. Maybe this aspect we can move forward. I know it's the holidays and New Year's coming, but we'll have a real estate committee meeting in January, possibly before the board meeting, that we can consider and maybe get to some firm conclusions, so that there'll be a process in place,
We'll have a little.
say by mid-January.
Yeah, that should be no problem.
Is that enough time?
Well,
Well, to do.
Well, I think what we'll do is we'll get the process going. So what I'm saying is there's two issues here. There's the Riverwalk Food Court and there's the street vendors, the separate issue. What you're saying, Howard, is that the street vendor issue is a bit more pressing.
Yes.
Based on the last board meeting, community concern. We all understand it's the holidays now. We will do our best to get started on moving, contacting Battery City, seeing their policy, and seeing what it would take for us to implement our own policy that'll be workable for everybody, you know, with a goal to having it done, you know, or having something kind of in place, or at least a draft by the, you know, January board meeting. But if that's not feasible based on our communications with them and whatnot, then
Sure.
we can't get it done in that time, but we'll try to.
Okay, and this, but of course, the studying for something that's a more permanent siting, or intended to be, not permanent, but more of a venue, such as having a food court. Whether it's at South Point Park, or whether it's at this, the pier, that'll take a little bit longer.
I don't think he's interested in a food court per se, but something more like a cafe type.
Well, whatever this is, which we haven't really had time to read and consider, this will take a little bit, longer than getting to conclusions about where food carts might be. So we'll work on that too.
Let's try to be sure we can get it for this summer, though, if we're gonna do it, because everybody's anxious.
Yeah, I'd certainly like to have something ready for the spring.
Yeah.
And now, last issue for this aspect of the meeting is the idea of a working group to consider progress in retail and placement of communities, amenities and services, where we have, not as a committee, as you said, Fernando, that we institute a working group and start to build to that we speak with RIOC, that and publicize that the working group is forming, and speak with Hudson Related and see if we can set up a series of meetings to move these items forward. Any comments?
Also in the future, I would like to discuss the public space that we have.
Okay.
We need to discuss that and think more about fairness amongst the different groups on the island.
Okay, well, if all goes well, we'll have another public real estate advisory committee meeting second week in January, and we can talk about that. It's one of the agenda items at that point. So And any other comments, any questions regarding this, any comments regarding this discussion of retail, of the retail space vendors? And, yes?
All right. So to sum up this meeting, the position of the RIOC Board of Directors is that RIOC has the right to... The committee is that RIOC has the right to prevent a mobile food truck from operating on Roosevelt Island, even though it can operate at any other place in New York City, and has all appropriate New York City licenses. And RIOC has decided that they have the right to say that, no, you can't operate on Roosevelt Island.
That we've decided that we have the right and
As of now.
responsibility. As of now, and pending verification.
Now, discussion, we
Right,
haven't
no
really
discussion.
decided on anything really. We
No, I'm
just
just saying,
decided-
you have the legal right to make the decision to ban food trucks that
Our-
otherwise
our-
have the right to
Our
operate in
opinion
other...
at this stage of the discussion is that we have the right and responsibility to issue permits for utilization and for space for the food carts that are under discussion. And again, pending further research, this is our conclusion. We'll consider this further at our next meeting, most likely to be second week in January.
Okay, thank you.
And at this point, I'm going to entertain a motion that
I
we
move
enter.
that we close the public meeting and go into closed session.
Okay, so we're now moving into a closed session.